Is this the beginning of the end for police brutality? Let's hope so.
We interrupt your regularly scheduled brainwashing in order to bring you news. Breaking news. A special segment of the almost daily Zcast, focused on curious, quirky, and quixotic news items that you may have missed during the last 48-hour news cycle. Hosted by me, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo.
Change. That's the first thing that comes to mind on multiple fronts. Not the least of which is that opening sequence. I need to change it so that it doesn't sound so silly. And today's news, this current bit of news breaking, the news breaking, is nothing to scoff at, and is most certainly not most appropriately accompanied by cheesy, cartoony, jokey yoga-doodle music. But there you go. I made that choice. If you haven't heard, you're living somewhere far away. Most people, I think, and I don't mean to be judgy. I'm not, you know me. I'm not really here to judge. I'm just here to be funny. But either you are adamantly boycotting television in general, or this isn't, you live somewhere where this isn't the primary controversy or interesting, thrilling news story being followed by your community. But, and that's how, that happens. But it's that's not really my point. Where am I going with this? I think what I was trying to say is that the following news, the news that is breaking now, as in real time right around us, is neither silly nor quixotic, nor it is a bit interestingly weird, but you probably didn't miss it because I think a lot of people, both here and abroad, are getting an earful about it now and will be in the coming days and weeks of its lifespan in the news cycles. But hallelujah for small graces, despite all the cynical things that could be said about it, there is a great sense of relief and appreciation right now, kind of spreading, I think, throughout the land, as it were, as former officer Derek Chauvin has been held accountable on all 3 counts that were brought against him in the matter regarding the untimely death of Mr. George Floyd. And I say that in that sort of ostentatiously silly kind of, I don't know, it sounds like something a British movie villain would say, or the way a British movie villain would phrase it. But I think that we could all speak a little bit more delicately, right? Like the world could do with a little bit more eloquence in the way we discuss our most ridiculous debacles. But I digress. It's a historic moment. Sorry. A lot of that did not come out the way I wanted it to, so I'm kind of fixated on that. But let's focus on what I am enthused and excited to bring to you, dear audience, on this Tuesday, April 20th at 3:22 p.m., precisely 1 hour before the high holiest of high hours, 420. Not to conflate the things. Despite all the cynical things that could be said about the system and its willingness to render this verdict at this time, it is still worth being celebrated because, no joke, I mean, this is historic. Let's get really, really clear about it. Some people, I think it's easy for a lot of people to sort of not really take this for consideration. I think those who are not adamantly advocating for reforming the police department are the kind of people who sort of live often in bubbles that lack certain key bits of information. And one of which being that, this particular bit of information, key to all of this, that cops ever so rarely get brought to justice. Now, I am of the nuanced middle path opinion that neither extreme oppositional side opinion about police officers, or peace officers as I prefer to call them, can be absolutely true, because they've become so extreme, right? And I refuse to hate. If there's a place where I draw an absolute line, it's there. I refuse to hate. I refuse to hate cops. I refuse to hate Wall Street bankers. I refuse to hate people in jobs that lead them down a path of corruption and cause them to, or, abuse them, neglect them into, people get twisted into doing things that they would never have done prior to having gone down that path. I think, right? And that's another issue. And yet, that's a larger issue, not another issue. That's a larger issue that encompasses this, and it's an issue that's at a level that I don't think we're quite there yet in the public discourse. But I think that's where we're going next, right? Is the problem limited to a few bad apples? If so, we need more of this. Plain and simple, we need fair, robust, well-articulated trials of their, reported crimes. Not that I'm a Law and Order control enthusiast, but someone's got to police the police, plain and simple. Someone's got to hold them accountable, and we blame society. We are society. And as I posted about on Instagram, and the caption of some things that I shared, that I made these things thinking about this trial very early on, and I wasn't sure when to post them, and I just haven't posted anything on Instagram for a while, out of sort of not knowing where to go first, and feeling there are sometimes when I feel like certain events in history need to work themselves out and come to some kind of denouement before I can tackle discussing them. And until I can do that, I really sometimes feel awkward about discussing other things. So I minimize my social media posting output. It's because it's all impromptu social media jazz to me. I don't have an agenda. I don't have a schedule. I should. I'm trying to work my way towards some sort of solution to that. But I digress. Before I lose my point, this moment in history is profound, and not enough can be said. Some naysayers I've already heard, and it makes sense too. I'm not really knocking them for saying it. I'm just bringing it to your attention. Some naysayers have already, in the earliest moments after the announcement, voiced their concern, let's put it this way, that this trial, this incident, this example of a bad apple getting just desserts, getting justice, is meant to appease the masses, but does not represent any kind of fundamental change. And I get that level of cynicism. And far be it, it's not my job to pontificate specifically on the issue of racialized violence or racially motivated violence. I don't know what the best way to describe that is, because it's violence, period. Which is why I feel I have some entree to speak about it with some passion and conviction and confidence, because beyond it being racialized in terms of this particular incident and the long history of violence between racial minorities and the quote white majority, close quote. Ultimately, the real problem is a problem of violence, and of violence being the solution to problems at hand, because nothing else is sufficient, I suppose. I don't know. It's a place I could never get to. I could never get to that place where I'm going to choose to cause that much damage and harm on purpose, because I find it a reasonable solution to my situation. And I get it. There's an outraged and very vocal group of people that are like, but when they're coming to get you, I'm like, yeah, okay, great, buddy. Yeah, sure. If suddenly, God forbid, zombies show up, of course I'll resort to violence. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about a peace officer responding to a potentially counterfeit, as to the best of my knowledge, never tested or verified. We do not know. Do we? If the record shows that we do know, please know that I will easily stand corrected. Still, even if you know that it is did the cop think that George Floyd was the mastermind of some kind of money laundering, counterfeiting criminal organization? I highly doubt that, right? Like, there was no cause for that. The whole thing was outrageous from the beginning. And the fact that, and I'm surprised they didn't make more of this. I didn't catch it. I didn't see 100% of the entire trial. But trust me, in terms of history and the history where it intersects law, the practice of law, this case will go down in history and will be studied in history for quite some time. Dare I call it the trial of the century? Not just because a police officer was held accountable for his criminal violence, which he has a professional responsibility to not engage in. Like, not only are cops supposed to not murder people, brown, black, yellow, green, purple, red, translucent, I don't give a fuck. Cops aren't supposed to murder people. Right? They can shoot people in self-defense, but they're not supposed to get away with abusing their authority through violence to get what they want. Net result, that greed and that blind rage leads to various forms of homicidal outrage and homicide. I want to take a moment to acknowledge a profound gratitude that I think will go under-recognized. But if you understand and can kind of roll with a working cosmological theory that says not only is probability, waveform function, quantum mechanics most likely to be true, but it probably is true, and therefore we should take some certain notions like manifestating all probable outcomes through the branching of probability waveform functions into multiple parallel, intradimensionally related but separate realities in which any given individual that's making a major decision, or any group of individuals that experience major unified decision making, bifurcate. In other words, they make a choice and they create a fork in the road. Both paths must be pursued. So let's take a quick moment, dear friends, who are, for those of you who are also weird and spiritual minded, to thank the gods and goddesses of the multiverse that, if you're listening to the sound of my voice here and you're living in a dimension in which you're currently, to some degree or another, joining in the celebration of this small bundle of justice being delivered to the right recipient, if I may create such a weird analogy, or whatever that is, and that we are not, right, and this is where the gratitude comes in, that we are not living through whatever chaos that's leveraged by psyop and manipulation and bad actors, personal and private and organized and industrial, of the chaos and madness on the streets that probably will have is arising, currently is fomenting in any and all of the various variations on what would happen in the world if a hung jury or a non-guilty verdict had come back, right? Like, I'm glad we're not sitting through that shit. We are in some transdimensional, there are alternate iterations of people exactly like us, you, me, and everyone involved in this world in which we're all cognizant or being impacted by the practical realities of everything going on in this case, right? And the historical probability waveform tunnel that it has caused in this particular nexus of time, space, shared realities. Just let's talk about, like, wow, I'm glad I'm not this is a good sign that we're not, falling into some of the darker, fear-mongered about probable outcomes supposedly being or trying to be engineered by those malicious and nefarious entities pulling strings. But I digress. That's a weird, complicated way of saying I'm glad that Officer Chauvin was found guilty on all three counts. I'm glad because of all the possibilities that might have sprung up out of the chaos and disruption of, the anger and disgruntled feelings that would have overridden whatever public protests or demonstrations were scheduled to play out. There's still going to be gatherings tonight, right? Presumably there are. I'll check again in the not too distant future, see how things are doing on the East Coast. If there's, large unruly gatherings late into the night or not. Everyone might just be like, yay, relief, a release of tension, huzzah, good for, a dose of justice, and jurors, such a hard word for me to feel like I'm pronouncing correctly, even when I am pronouncing it correctly. Huzzah to jurors doing the right thing and convicting a police officer who was clearly stepping beyond the lines of doing his duty honorably and with respect to all the things that he's taken an oath to, right? Sanctity of life being one of them. Because I'm not to sound like a fearmonger, but I was really worried, personally, in a very real sense, that of some of the darker possibilities that might have unfolded if I don't know which one would have been worse. A hung jury, which would have meant having to do it all over again, very likely, or an acquittal, not an acquittal, but a not guilty verdict. That would have been brutal, and it wasn't outside of the realm of possibility, given the history of how rarely white police officers are held accountable for the loss of life they're responsible for. Now, I'm not the only one, I'm sure. And it's a thing that not only should we remember or remind ourselves of this, in the coming days and weeks, it's really important that we look forward and ask ourselves, what can be done next? And I'm, the squeakiest of squeaky wheels, sounding like a little bit of a broken record. Like if we just celebrate this victory and then allow for the status quo to creep back in other words, if we don't all, as allies, as members of communities that overlap and intersect with one another, as human beings, if we don't step up to the plate of saying we all have to do the work required of us to heal the deeper issues, then we're not going to really ever see change, right? We have to address the deeper, darker issues behind these sorts of cases. And I don't mean crazy conspiracy theory darker issues. The plain and simple reality that humanity and anyone can see this, I think, with a broad enough perspective. You just got to step up and out of your own circumstances, set them aside, stop processing the world around you and history before you through political and ideological and religious lenses, and think about the facts as they are on the ground to the best of your ability to understand and discern them. And that's, there's a species-wide problem. And we can argue and point fingers and say it's this group or that group, or this issue or that issue, or this ism or that ism, or we can, from soup to nuts, from Cain and Abel to Potter and Wright. Was his last name? The young gentleman that Ms. Potter accidentally shot because she thought she was going to taser him. Is it Wright or? Yeah, I believe it is. Forgive me if I'm wrong. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's something else going on besides the complexities and nuances of each individual apparent set of motivating factors for a person who decides to choose to violate one of the most profoundly important sort of, like, no one wants to be killed, right? I'm fairly certain Officer Chauvin would not appreciate it if someone if an exact duplicate of himself showed up and did to him what he did to Mr. Floyd. I don't think he would appreciate it. And you can try and change my mind, but I'd probably giggle. no one appreciates a neck. Sorry, take two. No one appreciates a knee to the neck. I mean, there was even. Am I crazy or am I wrong? Am I wrong, or am I remembering correctly that in the days and weeks and months after the initial social processing of the video, the released and leaked and released, the socially available video of Mr. Floyd's death, there were people who thought it was comically appropriate to reenact it, right? And there was even like a stomp on your friend's knee challenge that went viral, and some idiots got hurt. Because, even with training, restraint, body weight, leverage, pinpoint, maneuvers. I didn't use those words all in the right order probably, but restraint maneuvers that use body weight to leverage against someone by pinpointing them, they cause pain. They are a use of force, duh. And it's ridiculous that the defense hinged on arguing that such a maneuver was not a use of force. And it was an abusive and clearly toxic use of force that went on for 8 minutes after the man had a physical duress to the point of passing out. Outrageous, right? Now, the problem isn't simply that this officer chose to do that and then thought he could get away with it and not be held accountable. The problem is that, if you're going to run with it's just a few bad apples theory, the problem is that there's a lot of bad apples. And hitherto, up until this point, none of the good apples were doing very much about it. And I don't mean to say that in a rude or judgmental way. There was a culture against it, right? For whatever reasons. There was an enforced, verbally argued for, passionately argued for wall of stoicness, which is finally being dismantled because human individuals within that system no longer want to participate in the face of such egregious violence, racially motivated or otherwise. Their jobs are to protect and serve and to apprehend people so that they can face justice and receive correctional, penal, what's the term I'm looking for? Penal sounds horrible. Sorry. Correctional punishment in hopes that they might find ways through that punishment to improve their moral character. I've said this before. I think I posted a meme. Maybe I only made it and didn't post it yet. But no one deserves to be assaulted, bullied, physically abused, or murdered by a police officer for a routine traffic stop. The rationalization that even routine traffic stops can become violent and dangerous is not a good rationalization for saying the moment something's a little off, shoot him in the face. You know what I'm saying? But that's where we're at. Jon Stewart, the collaborative brain father of Stephen Colbert, who I don't have the meme in front of me, but he put it somehow very bluntly that we are being manipulated to be stranded on the intersection of stand your ground and something else, which means we're being leveraged into violence. right? Through the way in which certain behaviors are being normalized that are focused around, that are focused on using gun violence as a deterrent, which is insane. Shoot at people to deter crime. So, you want me to become a murderer to stop bad guys? There's a problem there, right? And there's another, the additional problem. There's the second crazy layer. So that problem's been there since whenever we invented policing, and since whenever we invented guns, it all just got worse because we made it cool and I guess thrillingly addictive to wield such massive powers in our hands. And as all of that became a hyper-saturated metaculture, and I mean, look at what's going on in the other end of the spectrum, right? Like, the state didn't prove anything about Mr. Chauvin's racial opinions, and it didn't have to, right? Because as a police officer, it doesn't matter if had he done that to a white person, he should have been convicted also and gone to jail, because there was no reason for ever it to have escalated to that point. There wasn't. The supposedly imminent threat of danger and bodily harm was never actually there. Oh, and what was that thought I had from earlier? I wasn't going to talk about the case today necessarily, but then they came back with a decision so quick. You know what? I'll save it because I didn't want to do like a whole special episode focus on that. But there you go, folks. It's just happened. We were worried that we would have to wait for days and days and days. But I pray and I hope that as audience community members, you join in this, praying and trying to meditate and manifest towards the creation of the beginning of the end of police brutality. It's a process. It's going to take time. But let's really absorb. Let's go back and revisit and talk about how many members of his own police force testified against him and said that was outrageous, that was beyond the pale, that was unnecessary, that was unwarranted, that was uncalled for, that was illegal, that was not what he was trained to do. There was for quite some time this pride being taken by some subset of the support the cops community of the blue wall of silence. And I think, and there's still that issue. The blue line stickers are everywhere. And we have to be really, really clear. It sounds ridiculous that the prosecution had to say this. And by the way, it's 33 minutes and 33 seconds. Boom. But the policing was not on trial. The cops at all were not on trial. Right? Mr. Derek Chauvin, right? Derek with a D, not Eric with an E. I'll feel like an ass if it's Eric with an E and I've been saying Derek with a D this whole time. He was on trial for his choices, his actions, his behavior. And the historic first is that most of the time, these kinds of things do not result in a police officer stripped of their badge, removed from active duty, and incarcerated and thrown in jail. And if we're going to have a system of law and order, of justice, and of some sort of criminal corrections through incarceration, if we're going to do that, we should question the way in which we do it and ask ourselves, does it actually make people better? Are we actually serving real justice? But we should also, really move with this momentum that has been created during this process of this historic trial, during this historic meta moment of many historic things happening all at once. And don't let it peter out. Let's not look back on this a year from now and go, oh, look at how many other mass shootings, how many other police involved shootings of unarmed black men. Look at how many more terrorism incidents. Look at how many more, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Look how it just all kept grinding on. It can be done. We can do it. It's our calling, dear friends and audience fam. And the way in which we do that is by engaging in our responsibility of knowing that duality, non-duality problem is at the core of all of this. As weird, as crazy as it sounds, to solve police brutality, we need to invoke Zen quantum mechanics and do the work within to heal ourselves, which is not a singular event, but a never-ending, ongoing, recursive, fractal process that generates healing energy, which spreads along the intra-dimensional human species spiritual energy consciousness network, which joins all human beings together, even if they don't realize it, even if they're adamantly opposed to the idea and refuse to believe it, they're still hooked in. The way, like, a sunflower could randomly decide to be, fuck all, I don't need the sun, and try to not look at it, but it would still, because it just does, right? It would really have to override his genetics and do a lot of self-mutilation to not be that sunflower. The thing is, that's what we've done to ourselves. And this is why we have these violence pandemics, these violence epidemics, these outbreaks of human violence everywhere. Sure, there's a lot of contributing factors. And we can get lost in a rabbit hole there, but let's not get lost in the rabbit hole of arguing over the wrong things. Let's tune into our capacity to manifest a better reality by converging on the uplifting, the healing, the transcendent choice in the path of many forks in the road, right? Because collectively, we are all traveling a meta path together. And I know that's weird and confusing and can get really like, wait, what? We're all individuals and we have our own path and it's completely different from everybody else's. We're delicate individual snowflakes, not in that negative way, but in the authentic, have you ever studied snowflakes under a microscope kind of way? But we also share the universe and are stuck in a web of co-creating it together that we are intangibly inseparable from, and we can manifest reality together? Yes, dear friend. And it's confusing as fuck. But moments like this are key clarion call moments. Right here, right now, we can plant deep, large, strong, powerful seeds that will move mountains. Pardon the mixed metaphor. Seeds of healing, seeds of transformation, seeds of cumulative spiritual, correctional healing work. Having said all that, friends, I will leave you to it to continue enjoying your blissfully, additionally blessed and augmented April 20th. April 20th, 2021 will forever be the date remembered in history as the day that a police officer who egregiously tried to kill an unarmed black man with impunity, like so many cops before him, was actually held accountable and not just given a slap on the wrist, but was given a full throated declaration of guilt on all 3 counts brought to him. I'm not gleeful in that vindictive sense, and I hope that that those out there on the streets trying to march in solidarity with the Floyd family remember George Floyd's own calling for peace and the Floyd family's very animate and repeated request that we keep it civil, we keep it peaceful, and that their family and Floyd himself, renounced violent, riotous action. Now, I get it. There are those who don't, right? Who citing all kinds of very appropriate reasons. And as one very eloquent woman stated at the beginning of this whole process, earlier, the beginning of the just after George Floyd's death, in the absence of justice, violence becomes, a voice for the oppressed. Something to that effect. I'm not doing a very good job of quoting her, but I digress. Yes, that's valid and true, and far be it from me to be someone who advocates for other things, but we can do a little bit of that and to slap them in the face and make the point, but then we need to move with mindfulness and conviction and strength and backbone into a peaceful place, a place of joyous healing, a place of reconciling the differences so that it doesn't become a toxic, vicious cycle of retribution, right? Since Adam and Eve and Cain killed Abel, metaphorically speaking, have we been dealing with this violence issue? And seeing that I've reached the 42-minute point and beyond, I'm going to thank you humbly, friends, for joining me and tuning in for an episode of Breaking News. If you're going out into the streets, remember, manifesting peace is the calling. So don't get sucked into any of the ego traps for unleashing, some sort of self-righteous victory violence, which we've seen at times. And friends, I humbly beg you, keep on praying, and remember, there's more work to be done. So take the time, even in the rush of celebrating and in the thrill of enjoying the moment, take the time to connect deep within. Until next time, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart, dear friends. Thanks for tuning in.
And that is the latest breaking news. We now return you to your regularly scheduled brainwashing. Thank you for listening.
Go forth and heal.